Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, in our ongoing study in existentialism in the novel by Samar Reine. She died, then showed me. We're going to look at chapter 2, and with chapter 1, we were given the existential dilemma. In chapter 2, we start to see the workings of resolution, of reclamation of identity. So in chapter 2, we will find those first steps toward reframing Peyton's identity. And you'll notice I got it in 3 moments. We're going to look at last chase standing, 2, framing a landscape becomes framing a new self, and 3, my best self. Let's go to block 1 and get started. The last chase standing. Standing, though wounded in the shadows. We learn of Peyton's past love interest, Ashton, and we learn of her past break-up artwork created in the shadows, which she kept secret. Peyton confesses to having been wounded by this personal breakup. But she describes it as a relationship lost to immaturity. And that's a mature evaluation. She declares it's a relationship that was lost to immaturity. So she's standing, yet previously lost to immaturity. Peyton confesses to be decomposed. She confesses to being fragmented at the presence of Ashton. Peyton confesses to be drowning in devastating news. But then she dismisses Ashton. Ashton is not the solution. She does dismiss Ashton. She's standing while dismissing a false prior relationship. Royce enters. This is Peyton's godmother. She identifies Ashton Grant as the heir of a Texas oil and gas dynasty. Now Mark Chase enters, that's Peyton's uncle, and she confesses to her uncle, I am the last Chase standing. So a very, very determined person with all this shattering news of having lost her father and then having lost her mother a second time because she finds out that all of her mother's artwork has been replaced with commissioned copies. So it's like a second loss of her mother coupled with the loss of her father. And yet she says she's determined to be the last Chase standing. She still has great existential determination to remake her self-image. Let's go to block 2. Okay, block 2. Framing a landscape becomes framing a new self. External scars reflect internal scars. Enter Scarborough, the hands-on ranch hand that is dependable. Peyton is self-reflective for a moment and reminds herself of her father's betrayal. But it's at the same time she remembers his devotion toward her. So she meditates on this paradox. Peyton questions Mark, her uncle, about possible ways of generating income on the ranch. He responds with an idea of her father's that there could be an opportunity to mine for perlite on the property. But Peyton responds that would scar the property, that would scar the landscape. And the landscape is more important than money. Her worldview is more important than money. The struggle to reclaim and preserve the serenity of the ranch. Peyton takes serenity in the ranch. That serenity must be preserved. She existentially questions herself. How will she reframe her life? I love the way that's put. She asks, how can I reframe my life? What new content will there be to reframe? Now she symbolically hammers this large brass Japanese gong, and the resonance of it is very reassuring to her. She remembers it. It's a reassuring kind of a resonance that this brass gong gives off. So we look at the resonance of remembrance. For Peyton, she says it has warm overtones. It's very comforting to her. But coupled with that comes a more profound meaning, because now she says it has become a determined battle cry. A battle cry to reframe and remake her self-identity. She next declares a desire to go to the terrace for fresh air. And I want to give my own interpretive note here. Now we reach symbolic meaning. I mean, yes, existential meaning, of course, but the terrace is a symbolic place, okay? It is symbolic. The terrace is where Peyton posits her worldview. And we know from personal experience that our worldview is tied up with our self-identity. You don't separate yourself from your worldview. And so the terrace is where she meditates. The terrace is where she meditates on her worldview. It's where she meditates on her self-identity. So it's kind of between worlds. It's between subjectivity and it's between subjectivity and objectivity. It's a place of introspection, but it's a place of introspection about a posited worldview. And worldview is objective. So it combines subjectivity and objectivity. The terrace becomes Peyton's place of forming and positing and internalizing a worldview, and at the same time forming and internalizing a reframed self. Very, very significant symbolic place. Keep that in mind as we go through the novel. The terrace is a symbolic place of constructing and positing a self-defining worldview. Self-reflection over the landscape of her life. From the terrace, Peyton looks out over the landscape and immediately thinks of the artist's inability to completely grasp, to completely represent all that is present in the landscape. There's transcendence there. There's something beyond the artist. There's something beyond hue, texture, depth, proportion, light. All of those have a part in the transcendence. And then she makes a key observation. In this moment on the terrace, she says, this observation matches her life. That's what I say. This her worldview directly is coupled to her self-identity, her self-evaluation. The two go hand in hand. Worldview and selfhood are coupled together, as we know in existentialism that is true. The terrace becomes very, very significant in this novel. Very, very significant. It's not inside the estate. It's not purely outside the estate. It is a place where Peyton shapes and posits her worldview, shapes and posits her own reframed self-identity. So what we're looking at here is the goal of constructing and reframing my best self, block 3. That which matches her life is, of course, the view from the terrace. It shaped her life in the past. It must do so again. Peyton now settles into herself, into the pinkish hue of the sunset, and then she confesses, this is where I will become my best self. I love that. There's so much symbolic power, there's so much existential power in this self-reflective moment on the terrace. This is where I will become my best self. It's not just about reframing the old self. No, she wants to build, construct, and reframe a best self. I love that. So we're talking about inaugurating a new beginning. Peyton relates the story of when she was 12 years old and the chaotic confrontation with her mother, and later that same day of her mother's death. And now she's reminded again of the loss of her mother's paintings. That's like a second death experience. And the seemingly impossible task of forgiving her father for selling those original pieces of artwork and replacing them with commissioned copies. A new beginning must pass through forgiveness. We know that, and Peyton's going to find that out. A new beginning must pass through forgiveness. The terrorist view of being between worlds. Peyton recalls that she was able to preserve one of her mother's paintings. She did keep and preserve a painting called The Last Start, an unfinished painting that Peyton feels was more of a suicide note. She kind of feels like her mother committed suicide back when she was 12. The painting depicts a dead Hopi woman in wedding dress in the corner, while an apparition of this person's spirit is stepping off into the afterlife. So we're looking at afterlife and new life. Peyton confesses that the time has come to start again by swimming in paint. But then she corrects herself and she goes, no, I need to swim through a tunnel of paint. She's on a journey here. She's going to swim through a tunnel of paint and transition to the light at the end of the tunnel, but she's going to transition through swimming in paint. She will swim in paint. I want to make just a few closing comments here. If you are a fan of Ingmar Bergman, and I am a huge fan of the films of Ingmar Bergman, if you are a fan of Ingmar Bergman, you will be a fan of this novel by Samar Reine. I find great similarity between Samar Reine's novel, She Died, Then Showed Me, and the very strong existential films of Ingmar Bergman. I find a great deal of comparison between the two. So if you are a fan of Ingmar Bergman, you're really going to appreciate this novel by Samar Reine. But I love this particular chapter because now we look at how is Peyton going to find a way out of this existential drama, this existential catastrophe, this being shattered, being fragmented, and that she confesses that she is fragmented existentially. How do you reframe that? What content will come to the front to be reframed? How will she redefine her self-identity? And so it's all about reclamation. How will she reclaim selfhood? How will she reclaim identity? How will she reclaim the hope of a confident existential world view? And that's all going to take place, we know from this chapter 2, on the terrace. The terrace is that place where Peyton contemplates her worldview and contemplates her selfhood, and those two intersect at a symbolic place. I love the fact that Samar Reine has given us a symbolic place in this novel, the terrace. Not inside the estate, not purely outside the estate. It's an in-between world where Peyton contemplates, is very introspective, but she's introspective about a world view. She's looking out over the landscape. That is extremely powerful symbolism. That's why I say there's so much power in this novel. And we've only progressed through 2 chapters. So very amazing work here by Samar Reine. Very similar to Ingmar Bergman. And if you are a fan of Ingmar Bergman, you're going to love this novel. You are going to love this novel. This is Bergman in novel form. Very, very powerful chapter 2. And now we've got a hint at the goal, the task of reframing. Peyton wants to reframe her selfhood. She wants to reconstruct and reframe her selfhood, her self-image. And at the same time, she wants to preserve a worldview that was greatly defined by her mother and her mother's original artwork. Tremendous chapter 2. I'm so impressed with this first novel. That's going to wrap up chapter 2. Next time, we're going to look at chapter 3. I'm going to try to do these lessons, one lesson to take on an entire chapter. I was able to do it here, even with this tremendous amount of content. We were able to do that this time, and now we're really introduced to the, at least we get an introduction to the solution that Peyton, the road to reframing her self-identity, the road to reframing a positive, hopeful world view. That wraps up chapter 2, and I'll see you next time for chapter 3.